all of us, every one of us. And I also want to send our best wishes to Congressman Jim Baird and his wife, who are recovering from a car accident. They're going to be okay, but they had a pretty bad accident. And we're praying that they get out of that hospital very quickly. He's going to be fine. She's going to be fine, but it was a bad accident. And I want to thank the man who has been central to so many of our triumphs. He really has been. He's the guy that would call me to make those calls all the time. He's always working. And he's a nice person. You know, he's a high-quality person. But I want to tell you, he's a very tough cookie. I've seen both sides. Not often do I have to see the other side, because he's just, by nature, he's a very fine, religious. I like that. He's a religious person. I like that. I like religious people. It usually means they're more honest. Sometimes it doesn't happen that way. I've had some real religious ones that did numbers on me, and I said, I'm going to get them someday. They got me by surprise, but it's usually good, okay, right? And his name is Mike Johnson, Speaker Mike Johnson. He has my complete and total endorsement. Stand up, Speaker. So, you know, but it is true. A lot of times they'll say, I wish Mike were tougher. He's tough. He's tough as anybody in the room, actually. But can't be tough when you have a majority of 3. And now, sadly, a little bit less than that. I mean, a little bit less than that, maybe. But you can't be Trump. You can't, I want you. You know, you make 10 enemies, 20 enemies. That's the end of that, right? Everybody loves him. I would say there's one person he's given up on. I mean, I think he just gave up on this guy. He's so bad. He never votes for us. But no matter how good, he won't vote for us. There's a sickness there. You know, there's something wrong. You can have the greatest bill, the greatest for the country. Forget about for Republicans. Great, great, great for the country. I'm a no vote. We don't even bother calling him at 3 a.m, do we? Huh? But I want to thank another guy who's as tough as they come, because he went through something that none of us have gone through. I went through a little shot, but I get that throbbing feeling every once in a while.
Well, Donald Trump with those introductory remarks and dancing around a number of issues, as always, but referenced the successful day of 2 days ago, the operation in Venezuela, talking about winning the presidency but losing the midterms. He said that's the usual pattern, and he was about to continue with that, but then has veered off. So we'll continue to monitor that, and when he returns to something significant, Venezuela, Greenland, or some of the other issues at play, we'll return and bring you those comments. But let's go live to my colleague Sumi.
For the next guy. Who's the next guy down the pike? Who the hell is the next guy? He's died. I said, it's so bad. Oh, yeah. I had one where the dog died and the husband died at the same time. I said, it's so sad. Yes, I love this dog so much. She couldn't give it, and the guy left her a fortune. Can you imagine? I shouldn't have left her anything, but she was much more concerned. It's true. Oh, the dog was devastated. The husband, he was like an afterthought. Your wife loves you, Steve. She's a great wife. Another one who has a great wife, Jackie, is Tom Emmer, right? Look at you. You have a great wife, but you haven't been tested like these guys. You haven't. We don't want to test her, right? She's incredible. She's a strong, beautiful, great person. She's a great person. She actually liked me at the beginning when we were having little fights. We weren't even having fights. We just didn't know each other. We didn't know each other. And I heard he said something negative about me. He was sort of right about the subject, but you're not supposed to say ever, even though you're right. But Jackie was saying, I'm telling you, he's a great guy. He's good. He's going to be a great president, blah, blah, blah. She was fighting for me. And now I love this guy. He's great. She was right about both of us, I think, right? But Tom has been incredible. He's incredible at what he does. He's a great team player. Your conference chair, Lisa McLean, is so strong and powerful and beautiful. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you. And I think they're broadcast. You know, we said we don't care if the press comes or not. So when I say that, that means that they're broadcasting all this, and I'm letting my feelings out because it's true. I feel that way about so many people in the room. I could say it about many of the people in the room. Some I don't know as well, but many of the people in the room. They're incredible people. You're incredible what you're doing. We also have another one, Richard Hudson, chairman, NRCC. Richard's always in there. Always with a smile. No matter what's happening, Richard. He always has a smile. He's just a positive guy, smart and positive. Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate it. You do a great job. Republican Policy Committee Chairman, Kevin Hern. Kevin, where are you, Kevin? Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Did a great job. Every one of you got to be proud of yourselves. And basically the entire House Republican Conference. It's been really amazing what you've done. And we're going to give you some ammunition today. I said, I'd love to make a speech. The Speaker asked me, would you make a speech? I said, sure. You think Biden would do that? Would you make a speech? What? First of all, people wouldn't ask him to make a speech because it never worked out well, right? Could never find the exits. You finish, look, stare here, stare there, stare here. You could jump off the front if you had to. No matter what he did, he got himself into trouble. So basically, they didn't ask him to, but if he did, it wouldn't be good. But it's good with me because, you know, we have so much ammunition. We have ammunition. The problem is the fake news. That's why I like being on. I'd much rather do live television than do non-live because, like, when they say, as an example in my speech, peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol, peacefully and patriotically. Do you know that the Unselect Committee didn't report it, that I said those words? Do you know that the news never reported the words walk or march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol? Do you know they never reported it? It's a scandal. The Unselect Committee never reported that. They never reported that Nancy Pelosi was offered 10,000 soldiers, National Guard soldiers, whatever you want. No, I don't want them. And the mayor. The mayors were in writing. She was more honorable about it. But Nancy got caught when her daughter did a documentary. She's a documentarist. And she has her mother saying, it's my fault. I should have taken the soldiers or something. I saw that in the documentary. I said, whoa, this was a major story. Has she spoken to her daughter since that, you know? But they just, you know, they are vicious people, even on the attack. And it was an amazing military feat that took place yesterday. Think of it. An amazing military. The people are saying, well, thank you. You know, people are saying it goes down with one of the most incredible. It was so complex. 152 airplanes, many. Talk about boots on the ground. We had a lot of boots on the ground. But it was amazing. And think of it, nobody was killed. And on the other side, a lot of people were killed. Unfortunately, I say that, soldiers. Cubans, mostly Cubans, but many killed. And they knew we were coming, and they were protected, and our guys weren't. You know, our guys are jumping out of helicopters, and you're not protected, and they were. But it was so brilliant. The electricity for almost the entire country was, boom, turned off. That's when they knew there was a problem. There was no electricity. Caracas said, there's no electricity. It's not the only people with lights were the people that had candles. It was just off. So we sort of got them a little by surprise. But it was brilliant tactically. It was an incredible thing. But I watched where Schumer, he's such a bad guy. I mean, I've known the guy for a long time, and he's such a bad guy. You know, at some point they should say, you know, you did a great job. Thank you. Congratulations. Wouldn't it be good? I would say that if they did a good job. Their philosophies are so different, but if they did a good job, I'd be happy for the country. They've been after this guy for years and years and years. And, he's a violent guy. He gets up there and he tries to imitate my dance a little bit. But he's a violent guy. And he's killed millions of people. He's tortured. They have a torture chamber in the middle of Caracas that they're closing up. But he's tortured people. And now what they do, the radical left, they actually have people, and it's hard to get them. They're all paid people. Most of these people are paid. They're paid when they have brand new, beautiful printed signs by like the highest quality printer. And you have a woman, free Maduro. And the sign is before we even did the attack. Free Maduro. Why do you want him freed? I don't know, but he should be free. Oh, she reads the sign. What does that say? It says free. Well, that's what I believe. And, you see the sign. It's like, Lisa, we should all have quality signage like that. The one thing I want their sign maker. The guy is great. He does beautiful signage. The old days was better when they used to write out their own sign, wasn't it? They'd make a sign in the basement. They'd have an old broken board holding up a sign, and it's made with a magic marker, sloppy as hell, and it meant something. But today, when you have that yellow and black, they should use different colors a little bit. But the yellow is a beautiful shade of yellow. No, I want to find out who that is. I want him to work for the Republican campaign. He's much better than our guy, whoever the guy is. But the United States proved once again that we have the most powerful, most lethal, most sophisticated, and most fearsome. It's a fearsome military on planet Earth, and it's not even close. I've been saying it for a long time. Nobody can take us. Nobody. We don't want to have it. We don't have a discussion, but you read all and you see everything else. Nobody could have done that. Nobody has our weapons. Nobody has the quality of our weapons. The problem is we don't produce them fast enough. We're going to start producing them much faster. We're going to be very tough on the companies. We have the best weapons in the world, but it takes too long to get them, including allies. When allies want to buy them, they have to wait 4 years for a plane, 5 years for a helicopter. We're not letting that happen anymore. We're telling our defense contractors, you're going to start building faster. Guy makes... I have a big problem with it. I'm the king. I have sold more Boeings than any human being on earth. They gave me an award, Salesman of the Year. I said, what about Salesman of in the history of Boeing? I've sold more Boeing planes than any man in history by far, probably over 1,000. Over 1,000 planes. I said, that's the good news. But why should they wait 3-4 years to get a plane? They should get them immediately. The F-35s, it takes too long to get them. The Apache helicopter. I had India coming to me, sir, I've been waiting 5 years. We're changing it. India ordered 68 Apaches, and Prime Minister Modi came to see me. Sir, may I see you, please? Yes, I have a very good relationship with him. He's not that happy with me because, they're paying a lot of tariffs now because they're not doing the oil, but they are. They've now reduced it very substantially, as you know, from Russia. We're getting rich because of tariffs, by the way. I hope everyone understands that. They hate to report. We're going to have over $650 billion poured into our country or coming in shortly because of tariffs. They're finding all of these pockets of money. A couple of weeks ago, sir, we're off by $39 billion. Oh, is that good or bad? Meaning, do we have it or are we short of it? Sir, it's $39 billion that we can't account for. That means we have an extra 39. Yes, sir. I said, well, what are you saying? We just don't know where it came from. I said, check the tariff shelf. Sir, that tariff doesn't start until September. He said, no. It started about a month and a half ago. Check it. Comes back 25 minutes later. Sir, you were right. It came from tariffs. This never happened to us before, where we find plus 39 billion, not million, plus 39 billion. They were missing. We've taken in $650 billion or shortcoming, and that's because I'm being nice. If I want to be, and we have national security because of tariffs. And frankly, we have a big Supreme Court case. I hope they do what's good for our country. I hope they do the right thing. The president has to be able to wheel and deal with tariffs. Now, if you have the right president, it's good. You have the wrong president, if you have the wrong president, nothing's good. Tariffs are the least of your problems. We found that out for 4 years. We had the worst president, did the worst job. They had the worst policy. We have to even run against these people. I won't say cancel it.
Hello and welcome to BBC Your Voice, and we're answering your questions on the extraordinary events in Venezuela. On Saturday, Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela's president, was seized from his compound in Caracas after a US military operation. 48 hours later, he was in a New York court charged with narco-terrorism, with Donald Trump saying the US will run Venezuela. We'll throw into the pot US threats to take over Greenland, and lots to put to Sumi Somaskanda, who's on the Venezuela-Colombia border. Ione Wells is here in the studio with me. She's the BBC South America correspondent. And Paul Adams, our diplomatic correspondent, is in Washington. The questions in a moment, but let me show you what is happening in Washington, because Donald Trump is talking to House Republicans. The opening comments have been made, setting out the agenda for 2026. If he talks about Venezuela, we will obviously carry that live. But let's get straight to your questions first, and to Sumi. And the first question here, a pretty obvious one. Why did this strike happen? Why did Donald Trump, the US, capture Venezuela's president?
Yeah, that's an important question, isn't it, Matthew? And we have a couple of answers to that question. Indeed, what we've heard from President Trump, his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is that they saw Nicolas Maduro as the head of a drug trafficking organization that was directly a threat to the United States. So the United States, the Secretary of State, had said that they had designated two drug trafficking organizations, the Tren de Aragua, as well as the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns, as drug trafficking organizations. And because of that, they said that Nicolas Maduro, who they deemed as the head of one of those cartels, was trafficking drugs directly into the United States. That was the official justification they gave for why there was a direct threat to the United States. As a result of that, we saw strikes on what the U.S. has said were drug trafficking boats off the coast of Venezuela, in the Pacific, in the Caribbean as well. More than 30 strikes, more than 100 people killed. After that, we also saw President Trump change the narrative a bit. He then started talking about Venezuelan oil. What he said was stolen oil and stolen land. Now, it's not entirely clear what he means by stolen land, but by stolen oil, he's talking about Venezuela's large oil reserves and the American companies that were once a big part of processing that oil, extracting that oil from Venezuela and processing it. When Venezuela nationalized the oil companies, many American companies, or a few American companies, excuse me, that were involved in that process lost out a lot of money. And this is what President Trump is talking about when he says those companies need to be reimbursed. And last but not least, it's important to say that the Trump administration has cracked down on migration as well, migration across the southern border. In the last few years, Venezuelans have made up a big part of the people who have been flowing across the U.S. southern border into the United States.
Yes.
President Trump has claimed that those are drug traffickers, but there is not proof that the vast majority of those who have entered are drug traffickers. Regardless, they want to stop that flow as well.
Sumi, we'll unpick a lot more of that, certainly oil and those other issues in a moment or two. But Ione, in terms of the strikes, and we were seeing pictures of the events from Saturday, how many people were actually killed?
Well, it's really hard to get reliable data on this. The government hasn't published official death tolls so far. We know that at least 32 Cubans were killed, who we know to be members of Maduro's security personnel, because Cubans traditionally were made up most of his security network. There is an anonymous network of doctors in Venezuela that tends to be fairly reliable. They get data from various hospitals around the country. They said yesterday that they had recorded at least 70 people dead from these strikes. They had calculated 43 bodies that had been taken to a morgue as well. There have been reports, too, that some civilians have been impacted by the strikes, including one older woman reportedly killed and potentially more injured as well.
Paul, in terms of international law, what is the consensus? Legal or illegal, this move?
I think it's fair to say, Matthew, that there is no consensus. This is a case of international law versus domestic law. In terms of international law, well, clearly the UN Charter says that it is illegal to use force against the territory of another country, unless there has been the consent of the UN Security Council or some kind of direct threat. In terms of domestic law, the US federal agencies have congressional approval to conduct arrests against wanted suspects pretty much anywhere in the world. And so that would include, going and nabbing Maduro from the heart of the Venezuelan capital. Now, there is a question about the use of force as the American forces went in. Well, the argument there has been that in the conduct of such arrest operations, this is not an invasion, this is not regime change, this was an arrest operation, that the federal forces involved have the authority from Congress to defend themselves as appropriate. And since helicopters did come under fire, then force was used. Of course, opponents of that will argue that those helicopters wouldn't have come under fire at all had they not been flying directly into the Venezuelan capital. Then, as far as the court in New York is concerned, I think it's worth noting that clearly Mr. Maduro will try to argue that as the head of state, he enjoys international sort of legal immunity. I think the consensus there is that the courts won't really care how he got there. They will simply examine the charges against him.
Sumi, Donald Trump said on Saturday the US will run Venezuela. What do we think he means by that?
That's a question many journalists have been asking President Trump, and we don't have an entirely clear picture yet. What we understand is that President Trump and his administration want to be able to dictate to Venezuela's interim leader, Delcy Rodriguez, what she does. They want her to meet a few key demands. I mentioned drug trafficking. They want to see the flow of drugs stop. They also want to see U.S. companies be able to enter Venezuela and extract oil again. And they've also talked about clamping down on the flow of migration. But really, how that will look is not clear. President Trump has said he's not afraid of boots on the ground again. There could be further U.S. military intervention if the interim president doesn't comply. But right now, it looks like creating a U.S.-friendly government in Venezuela that will meet the Trump administration's demands.
Ione, who is currently in charge in Venezuela now? Where is the army in all of this? And a question from Vincent Chua, who says, if the new president does not want to do a deal with Donald Trump and do what he wants, what actually happens?
So despite what Donald Trump's saying, in reality, the Venezuelan government's still in charge day to day, and that is led by the now acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, but also other ministers who were also in power under Maduro. The army has said that it is recognizing Delcy Rodriguez as the acting president, so far remaining loyal to her, which is really important in Venezuela because the military is hugely powerful. Any leader would very much struggle to govern without them. It would be potentially dangerous to attempt to do so. I think that's a really interesting question we've had from a viewer. What happens if Delcy Rodriguez doesn't do as Donald Trump wants? Well, he has said that if she doesn't, in his words, do the right thing, code for doing what he wants, I think, that she could face the same fate as Maduro or even worse. So I think even though the US is not actually in charge, it certainly is holding a degree of influence over the government there right now through these threats, which they have seen what could happen and what happened to Maduro.
And a quick supplementary question, Ione. In terms of the history of this, when did Maduro actually come to power? Because certainly in Donald Trump's first term, he was also looking to get rid of him back then, wasn't he?
Maduro's been in power since 2013, since the death of his predecessor, Hugo Chavez. And yes, he has been a long foe of Donald Trump. There are multiple reasons for this. One is migration. There has been millions of people who have fled Venezuela under Maduro, many of whom to the US, something that President Donald Trump wants to crack down on. The second is this allegation that the US has leveled at Maduro, that he is the head of a criminal trafficking organization that in part is responsible for smuggling some drugs to the US. Again, something that Maduro denies. Then there's the fact that particularly after the last election in 2024, the US has not recognized Nicolas Maduro as the legitimate president of the country. Those elections were widely dismissed as neither free nor fair. So there has been a democratic argument too for the US wanting to remove him from power.
And the politics is so complicated, and I'll come back to you on that in a moment or two. But Paul, just remind people, you touched on it before, but remind us what Maduro was actually charged with. And is there any chance that this case actually gets thrown out?
OK, well, let's look at the charges. I'm going to refer to my notes here because I want to make sure we inform the viewers correctly. Essentially, three main areas: narco-terrorism, cocaine trafficking, and weapons offences. Now, these were all part of an initial indictment that dates back a few years to the first Trump administration, but has been revised more recently. Conspiring with US-designated foreign terrorist organisations like the Tren de Aragua, you've already heard referenced, and also the FARC, Colombian rebels. The use of the Venezuelan military and intelligence resources to move large quantities of cocaine to the US, and the possession of illegal weapons to facilitate that movement. Those are, in broad terms, the charges being brought against the President Maduro and his wife. He could face life in prison if convicted on these charges, just as the former Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega did when he was taken out of Panama by the US military back in 1989. Donald Trump's been talking about him just in his remarks at the Kennedy Center just a short time ago, says that he's a violent guy, that he ran torture chambers in Caracas and has killed millions of people. Typically Trumpian exaggeration, perhaps, but clearly there is a view here that President Maduro is a very bad guy. I think as to whether or not the charges will stick, I think most people recognise that this is a case that's going to go on for a very long time. It probably will be still going on after Donald Trump leaves office. It's a complicated case. There are a lot of moving parts to it, and it has only just begun.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that. Sumi, to you, and you heard the list of charges that Paul was going through. Of course, what was not mentioned was something you said in your first answer, which was oil, because that's a huge part of all of this, because Donald Trump has said the quiet bit out loud, hasn't he, several times?
He certainly has. Look, what's important to know is that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world at around 303 billion barrels. Its oil capacity is completely underutilized. That's because of endemic corruption and also a lack of investment for many years here. For decades, American companies were part of the extraction of Venezuelan oil here. When the oil industry was nationalized, those companies lost out. And President Trump has been very clear. He sees Venezuela as really a vast source of potential for American oil companies to reap the benefits of those oil resources here in Venezuela. In fact, the Washington Post had even reported that President Trump informed oil companies before and after that operation to remove Nicolas Maduro from power in Venezuela. Imagine he didn't notify Congress, but did, according to the Washington Post, notify those oil companies. So really interesting to see that this has been a massive focus of President Trump. Although he originally talked about drug trafficking and migration, it is clear that being part of Venezuela's oil industry is a massive factor in why President Trump has engaged with Venezuela militarily.
I know you wanted to pick up because we've had a question, which is a pretty simple question, but right to the point, that says, why isn't Venezuela rich from all the oil it's actually got? And who will Donald Trump, if they control the oil, actually sell it to?
Well, in terms of why Venezuelans aren't feeling particularly rich from it at the moment, in part, as Sumi touched on there, it is due to widespread economic mismanagement over the last couple of years, as well as corruption in the country, but also a lack of investment, really, that has led to underproduction. It does have the biggest reserves in the world, but there's only about 1 million barrels produced per day, which might sound like a lot, but actually that's only 0.8% of global production. And so this is one of the reasons that Donald Trump thinks that it has more potential for US companies to re-enter Venezuela once again. At the moment, most of the oil that Venezuela produces goes to China. It used to be to the US, but then many of those companies left after the industry was nationalized. Heavy sanctions were then imposed later on the industry. So I think what Donald Trump is suggesting is that certainly more of that oil could go back to the US again. In practice, though, I think we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves and remember there are still big barriers to this actually happening. One is, will these companies want to invest in a country that is politically, socially, economically risky and unstable still at the moment? Two is that oil prices are quite low at the moment. There's an oversupply of oil globally, meaning that, again, it's not a particularly attractive time to be investing. And three, the security question, too. I think companies will be wondering whether or not it is sort of safe and secure for them to be acting in the country right now.
Plenty more on Venezuela in a moment, but of course, 2 days after that operation in Caracas, we've had more comments from Donald Trump and those surrounding him about Greenland. Let me ask you, Paul, about this. Are there real alarm bells beginning to sound in European capitals about whether Greenland is next in this sort of action from Donald Trump and his foreign policy?
Oh, yes, there most certainly are. And you only have to look at the text of the statement released by several European countries just today to realise just how real those fears are. There's no immediate prospect of a kind of military operation or a takeover of Greenland. And in fact, when Donald Trump was asked about this on Air Force One a night or two ago, he rather brushed away these concerns and said, let's talk about that in a couple of months' time. But the EU statement says that NATO has made it clear the Arctic is a priority and European allies are stepping up. Security must be achieved collectively through NATO. There are constant references to the North Atlantic Alliance. Essentially, the fear is that Donald Trump isn't interested in NATO providing a kind of security umbrella for Greenland, a part of the world that everyone acknowledges with the melting of the Arctic ice cap is becoming more and more militarily and perhaps commercially, strategically important, that he's simply interested in looking after that himself as part of this new expanded Monroe Doctrine that we might come on to talk about. And that the North Atlantic Alliance, let's face it, Greenland is part of the North Atlantic, is not how he sees that security being guaranteed. That is a real fear, not just in the case of Denmark, but across Europe.
Yes, and the Danish Prime Minister saying only yesterday if there was an attack on Greenland, it would be the end of NATO. So a really blunt assessment there. Sumi, Paul touched on it, but just tell me a little more about why does Donald Trump want Greenland? He said it before and people perhaps thought he was half joking. Now they are taking it incredibly seriously.
Well, on the one hand, it's important to know that Greenland is home to some critical minerals that the U.S. would like to access, so uranium and iron. But President Trump has said it's not about the minerals, it is about national security. As Paul just touched on, it's being seen as a territory that is important strategically and militarily. And President Trump has said Chinese and Russian ships are all around Greenland, and he sees it as important for the U.S. to own, to be able to gain that access militarily as well. Now, it is important to note as well that, that NATO military alliance, of course, the U.S. knows it is the biggest provider to that military alliance. And President Trump, therefore, sees it as within the U.S.'s purview to own an important piece of being strategically ready. And Paul talked about, the Monroe Doctrine. If you look at how the U.S. is now viewing the world in Donald Trump's second term, as this being part of the U.S.'s sphere of influence, President Trump sees Greenland as necessary to be part of the U.S. in order for the U.S. to be secure, even if that means angering allies like Denmark.
Paul, let me go back to you and talk more about Monroe Doctrine, because Mike Clinch says with the situation in Venezuela, also in Ukraine and also in Gaza, is the concept of international law and the UN-led world order now dead?
Well, that's a fear that has been voiced really since Donald Trump came back to office. In terms of the Monroe Doctrine, the revitalizing of a 1823 doctrine originally passed by or announced by the then U.S. President James Monroe. Essentially, what we're seeing now is an expanded version of that. In fact, people talk about it as encompassing everything from the Aleutian Islands in the west to Greenland in the east, and everything from the Arctic in the north to the Antarctic in the south, with Donald Trump saying anything that happens in that geographic space is a U.S. vital national interest. Any attempt by an outside power, whether it be China or Iran or Russia, to exert influence or extract benefit from anything in that space, and Venezuelan oil would be a good example of that, then that is to be resisted by the United States. That both countries there should essentially sort of direct their policies towards the American national interest. That's why we see quite a significant amount of political influence being wielded, whether it's to see changes of government in Central and South America or access to key resources like Venezuelan oil. All of this, Donald Trump is saying, is vital American strategic and security concerns, and everyone else should keep their hands off it.
Yes, and that's why people certainly in Cuba, in Colombia, watching very, very closely. Only in terms of what is happening on the ground politically in Venezuela, Donald Trump ruled out really early on over the weekend elections. But you have Maria Corina Machado tentatively perhaps returning to Venezuela, but the US president saying there is no respect for her, and yet she was largely seen as the real winner of the last set of elections.
Yes, there's a couple of points here. Constitutionally, in Venezuela, in theory, if they've sworn in an acting president, they are meant to have elections within 30 days. Now, I understand there is a mechanism for that to be extended at least once or twice. But certainly, as you say, Donald Trump has said that he doesn't think that's a realistic timeline, and that in his words, the US needs to fix the country before there can be elections. Now, contrast that with what we've heard from the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado. She said that her party, the opposition movement, would be prepared to go and contest free and fair elections again, which they are confident they would win. After the last elections in 2024, they published what were seen to be reliable voting tallies from electronic voting machines, saying that they, not Maduro, had won that election. But she has been somewhat, I say somewhat, majorly sidelined by Donald Trump so far. He said that she doesn't have the respect and support in Venezuela, something which I think many of the opposition would contest.
Really briefly on this, I was listening to an interview from Marco Rubio over the weekend, and he was talking about the problems with Maduro. He just wouldn't, he said, do a deal, make an accommodation with Donald Trump. Is that what this is all about? That the leaders of any sort of country are required now to do what the US president is actually demanding?
Well, look, I think, to put it bluntly, Donald Trump has made it pretty clear what could happen to government ministers or the acting president in Venezuela if they don't do what he says. It is still a sovereign country. He doesn't suddenly have the right to control Venezuela, but I think he's made it clear that he feels he can control them through these kinds of threats.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, so a final thought, both from Paul and from Sumi, because there are huge dangers here, potentially, aren't there, in Venezuela? There are plenty of militias, you have an army still in place, a new president, and all sorts of historic precedents where interventions from the US have gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, just think of Iraq and Libya and Afghanistan. I think it is clear that the Trump administration, as it figured out what to do about Venezuela, thought we are not going to go down that path. This is not going to be about regime change, because if you're going to go down that route, you're going to involve massive deployment of American military forces, huge diplomatic and economic efforts to put countries back on a proper footing. It hasn't worked in the past. There's no earthly reason to think that it would work again now. And so perhaps the sensible thing is to leave the deeply unpopular but secure or relatively secure government structure in place. And then instead of, trying to remove it and put something else in its place, you merely threaten it to do what you want it to do. And that's why essentially what Donald Trump is saying to the government in Venezuela is, there are still arrest warrants out there. We could still come back in with further attacks from the air. There are all sorts of ways in which the United States can continue to exert pressure. But regime change and taking over a country, not this time.
Sumi, just 30 seconds from you in conclusion, picking up on that. It is incredibly fluid, the situation now, and is likely to go on for weeks, if not months, and that is dangerous, isn't it?
It is, especially in Venezuela, where people might grow impatient if they see that the current Maduro regime still remains, that the U.S. exerts influence over it, and that the opposition has not been given a chance to lead a democratic transition. All of that, Matthew, we should say, has an impact here in Colombia and across the region.
Sumi, there on the border, thanks very much. That's all we have for time for in terms of the questions. Thank you so much for sending in all the questions you've sent. Hopefully we got to yours. My thanks to Paul, to Sumi and to Ione here in the studio. Until next time here.
Our chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, who is in Westminster. And just, Henry, take us through what the government has got to say about all this.
Well, the government's position, Sarah, is much as it has been since Saturday, which is to say that they support international law in general. They do not want to come to their own determination of whether these American actions in Venezuela were consistent with international law. They believe Nicolas Maduro was an illegitimate president, and they now hope Venezuela can transition to democratic rule. And there's been a touch of pressure on Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, yesterday in the House of Commons, from Labour MPs to harden up that position. But I certainly don't think that as it stands it's anything approaching intolerable pressure for the government. The government, which, by the way, did not expect to begin 2026 talking about Venezuela, talking particularly about international affairs altogether. Sir Keir Starmer is roundabout now beginning to chair his first cabinet meeting of this new year, and he wants to focus on the cost of living. We know a bit of what he's saying to cabinet ministers. He's saying this: in a world of uncertainty and upheaval, tackling the cost of living will remain our focus. I know many families across Britain are still worried about the cost of living. When I talk to people, they tell me it is the biggest issue they are facing. We are on their side. So worth watching, I think, for a lot more public interventions from Sir Keir Starmer designed to show that he is addressing the cost of living. Whether that addresses his political issues, I think we'll have to wait a little bit longer to find out.
Let's discuss all of this with Ivan Briscoe, who met Delcy Rodriguez. Ivan, 3 times. You're the former programme director for Latin America at the International Crisis Group. So, as I was outlining there, for Venezuelans themselves, without an election, which Donald Trump isn't asking for, he says he needs to fix the country before an election can be held, there's little change.
There seems to be little change, but there's a lot of nervousness on the streets. Obviously, Caracas was largely empty in the hours after the raid on Saturday morning. You may have seen that there was some form of gunfight or shooting into unidentified drones next to the presidential palace yesterday evening. It would seem that the security forces are on edge. Chavismo has been in power, of course, for over a quarter of a century, just with 2 presidents in that time. First of all, Chavez and then Maduro. Removing its chief, as it were, will send reverberations throughout the movement and risks creating factional infighting, particularly between the security and military apparatus and the civilian leadership of the movement, which is now in the hands fundamentally of Delcy and Jorge Rodriguez.
So help us to understand why it is too hard to bring in the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez. We know that when it comes to the opposition, they say that they collected tallies, voting tallies, that they say they won. It was reviewed by the Carter Center, which also say that they believe the opposition won. Why not? Why is the US not calling for them to be brought in?
The evidence that the opposition, Maria Corina Machado, who led the campaign, and Edmundo Gonzalez, who was her surrogate candidate, the evidence that they won in 2024 is overwhelming. The physical vote tallies collected by the opposition, printed out from each voting precinct, show that they won with something like 70% of the vote. But the election was closed down. The election authorities said, no, Maduro has won. Maduro claimed victory immediately, and no evidence of Maduro's victory has been provided by the authorities since. So, I mean, that shows to the extent to which the opposition is indignant, outraged, and claims victory. And obviously, Maria Corina would like to see Edmundo Gonzalez, her candidate, in place. The problem is that Chavismo controls the entire country. This is an authoritarian, single-party state, which, in the wake of that election robbery, if you like, ratcheted up its levels of repression, took in many more political prisoners, controlled all spaces of dissent, and has turned itself fundamentally into a police state. So how Maria Corina operates within Venezuela is a mystery. I mean, she was obviously in hiding before leaving to go to pick up her Nobel Prize in Oslo. Quite how she will get back, how she will operate, and how she will claim power when the entire state apparatus, and I'm talking about the central state, the regional powers, the municipal powers, plus all branches of government are under the control of one political movement. I mean, it raises a lot of questions how that's going to be achieved without some form of negotiated transition.
We're going to get the opportunity to talk to Tobias Ellwood, former chair of the Defence Select Committee and also former...
Hello and welcome to Verified Live. And with the shockwaves from the weekend military action in Venezuela still reverberating, there is new alarm over Donald Trump's foreign policy and threats to Greenland. Leaders of several European countries have declared their support for Greenland, saying it belongs to its people and only Greenland and Denmark can decide its future. Well, a joint statement came after President Trump renewed calls for Greenland, which is a Danish territory, to become part of the United States. European leaders are meeting in Paris alongside President Zelensky to discuss security guarantees for Ukraine as part of any peace deal with Russia. But that meeting has been overshadowed by the dramatic weekend events which saw the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, seized in the capital Caracas and then taken to New York. Well, let's start this hour with that particular element because President Trump, well, he's been talking to members of the Republican House in New York and commented on the operation to seize Venezuela's president and just the scale of the action.
You know, people are saying it goes down with one of the most incredible. It was so complex. 152 airplanes, many. Talk about boots on the ground. We had a lot of boots on the ground. But it was amazing. And think of it, nobody was killed. And on the other side, a lot of people were killed. Unfortunately, I say that, soldiers. Cubans, mostly Cubans, but many killed. And they knew we were coming, and they were protected, and our guys weren't. You know, our guys are jumping out of helicopters, and you're not protected, and they were. But it was so brilliant. The electricity for almost the entire country was boom, turned off. That's when they knew there was a problem. There was no electricity. Caracas, there's no electricity. It's not the only people with lights were the people that had candles. It was just off. So we sort of got them a little by surprise. But it was brilliant tactically. It was an incredible thing. But I watched where Schumer, he's such a bad guy. I mean, I've known the guy for a long time. And he's such a bad guy. You know, at some point they should say, you know, you did a great job. Thank you. Congratulations. Wouldn't it be good? I would say that if they did a good job. Their philosophies are so different. But if they did a good job, I'd be happy for the country.
Well, that was Donald Trump talking in the last hour, talking to House Republicans at the Kennedy Center in Washington. So we'll keep an eye on all of those events. But I was saying there in the introduction about the renewed threats about Greenland, the US wanting to take over Greenland. Let's get more on that from our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale.
The frozen wastes of Greenland are in Donald Trump's sights after his military action against Venezuela. He says he wants this Danish territory to become part of the United States. But NATO allies have other ideas. In a joint statement, the leaders of Britain, Denmark, France, Germany, Poland and Italy said security in the Arctic must be achieved collectively in conjunction with NATO allies, including the United States, by upholding the principles of the UN Charter, including sovereignty, territorial integrity and the inviolability of borders. Greenland, they said, belongs to its people. It is for Denmark and Greenland and them only to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland.
It is not in the interests of NATO, the UK's national security or our collective security to question Greenland's future. We've heard very clearly from Denmark's leaders the implications for the NATO alliance.
And this, from one of Donald Trump's most senior officials, is why US allies are worried.
The United States should have Greenland as part of the United States. There's no need to even think or talk about this in the context that you're asking of a military operation. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland.
The renewed focus on Greenland came after the US captured President Maduro of Venezuela, the White House claiming it had a right to control the so-called Western Hemisphere, both north and south of the US mainland. On the streets of Caracas, there was high security, the country's justice minister joining police, hoping to show that order remains despite the departure of Maduro. Supporters of the deposed Venezuelan leader have been protesting his seizure by the United States, calling in vain for his return. One person who says she's hoping to come back is the opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who praised the US military attack on her country and called for fresh elections.
January 3rd will go down in history as the day justice defeated a tyranny. It's a milestone, and it's not only huge for the Venezuelan people and our future, I think it's a huge step for humanity, for freedom and human dignity.
But Ms. Mercado's whereabouts are not known, and she's currently facing arrest if she returns. That's because while Maduro may be gone, his government is not. This was his former deputy, Delcy Rodriguez, being sworn in as interim president, someone the opposition accuses of being one of the main architects of Maduro's corruption and narco-trafficking. But the focus now is turning north to Greenland, where European leaders fear any US aggression could put at risk the entire transatlantic alliance. James Landell, BBC News.
Well, General Ben Hodges is a former US Army commander in Europe. He says Europe is right to be alarmed about Donald Trump's interest with Greenland.
Yes, they should be alarmed because I think the President of the United States is serious. When I first heard about this, I dismissed it. But after watching what happened in Venezuela this weekend and then the comments by the President and Mr. Miller from the White House, I take them very serious, unfortunately.
Denmark's Prime Minister only yesterday said any attack on Greenland would be the end of NATO. Do you share that blunt assessment?
It certainly would be very damaging to the alliance because our allies would lose trust in the United States. This would damage American security because people will be reluctant to share intelligence, maybe even deny access to the United States, to our bases across Europe. So this would be very damaging for us as well as for NATO. And of course, this would be a huge gift to the Kremlin. But it doesn't have to be the end. I hope that we will be able to find a way to moderate the damage. But it's embarrassing for me that the idea that an American takeover of Greenland is even being seriously contemplated.
I'll come to that thought about what could be done to mitigate some of these things in a moment. But are we seeing a new world order from Donald Trump going into 2026 where might is right?
There's no doubt about that. The Trump administration released their national security strategy back in November. And so things like Venezuela, Greenland, Cuba, Colombia, all of these are in the Western Hemisphere. And the Trump administration had made it very clear that they believe that Western Hemisphere belongs to the U.S. and that it's okay for the U.S. to use its power to dominate all of the Western Hemisphere. And so threats about Greenland fit inside that mindset. I don't think that the administration views the traditional international rules-based order, which America helped create after the war and from which the United States has benefited more than anybody. I don't think they feel obliged to operate within that same construct anymore.
General Ben Hodges.